I would suggest that you please limit your comments or questions to 2 minutes. Who was the first? Yes, go ahead.
Hello? Okay. So you drew this picture of the war that the Islamists are trying to take over and Assad is just trying to fight the Islamists, right? This is basically what you were saying.
The picture I'm painting is there's a conflict. The two groups have very different, very
The Islamists, which we call the Islam Brothers, something like that, is yes. Yeah. You call them brothers, which is not the name. It's Muslim Brotherhood, but you call them brothers, which I don't know why. But anyway, so that's the picture you drew, right? You said the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to bring down the Ba'athist Assad regime. Correct. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you're saying that people that Assad is killing, right? We all know 500,000 people have died in Syria right now. No, wait. The people, let's say 5 people have died. Is that okay? 5 people? 2 people? They're Islamists, right? So they deserve to die because they're trying to bring down the regime.
Are you saying that that's what I'm saying?
No, well, that's, what is your justification for the war that Assad is unleashing on his own people?
So what's your question?
No, I'm trying to understand your narrative here. So you're saying the Islamists are trying to bring down the Ba'athist regime, so the Assad regime is just protecting itself, correct?
Okay.
No.
Can I answer?
No, yes, just yes or no. I'm trying to understand.
No, that's all right.
No, because I'm trying to see how different your narrative is from the U.S. government narrative. Because the American government is saying we're fighting terrorists.
Hello. Okay.
Isn't it?
Okay, I'll answer your question. Thank you.
Sir, you're not sharing the meeting.
No.
Please do not turn this into a
It's 2 minutes.
between 2 people.
You said 2 minutes, correct?
Yes.
It hasn't been 2 minutes. Yes, it hasn't. So the U.S. government says that we are killing terrorists. Isn't it? Isn't this what the news is saying? That we're killing terrorists, right?
Please formulate your question.
Oh my God. No. What is the U.S.? What is Fox News saying? What is Fox News saying? We're killing terrorists, Islamist terrorists in Syria, isn't it? No. What's the difference between your narrative of the war and the Fox News? I don't understand.
Sir, your time is up.
Sir, you can.
Time is up.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what your question is. It's obvious what your position is. It's obvious that you don't like the Assad government. Okay, that's obvious. What I said was that I described the conflict. Is there a conflict in Syria? Yes, there's a conflict in Syria. It's between 2 sides, yes. I've described the situation, correct? If I described a situation, there's a conflict between 2 sides. One side has a certain view about how to organize Syrian society. The other side has a different view about how to organize Syrian society. Yes, there are people dying for it, and they're very different views. And I would argue they're irreconcilable views.
Chair is speaking.
Can I? Okay, next person, please.
Yes, no, I was second.
Now, there was a fellow downstairs who is giving out a leaflet who evidently supports this quote-unquote resistance to Assad and is giving it a leftist twist. And I don't believe it, and I would like to ask you a question, but first I'd like to point out that in the reading list on the back of the flyer is a book called Burning Country, which I read. And I saw the 2 authors here in New York at a discussion of their book. And people asked, one person asked the authors, do you think that the so-called resistance should accept U.S. money, CIA money? And both of them said yes. Both of them said yes. So what kind of resistance is it that accepts CIA funding in the Middle East, which has been oppressed by imperialism for the last 100 or more years? So I would like to ask you, if you know a single secular, progressive, quote-unquote, movement within this so-called resistance, because I've been unable to find any. And I think that's the big crime of all of this, the way we're spoon-fed bullshit in the news every single day.
Well, I mean, as I said, I mean, there is an Islamist opposition to the Ba'ath Arab Socialist government. It's existed since the 40s. There were fights between Ba'ath Arab Socialists and the Muslim Brotherhood in Damascus in the 1940s, which were resembling the fights between communists and fascists on the streets of Berlin. I mean, there were fist fights. Hafez al-Assad had been knifed by a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the nature of the relationship. It's been going on for decades and decades and decades. So is that movement, is the Islamist movement taking money from the United States? Yes, it takes money from the United States, from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from Turkey, from Jordan. This is all documented. It's all on the public record. There's no secret about this.
Yes, yes.
Kill.
Yes.
Kill.
Thank you, Stephen, for the historical perspective, which is very useful. I'm really puzzled by the current Syria situation. I have a hard time figuring out the Trump policy on Syria. During the campaign, he made certain kind of pragmatic noises about negotiations. I suppose this is connected to his position on Russia, his non-confrontational, whatever the motive, view of Russia. And I guess the Syrian position flows from that. But because of this Russiagate intense campaign against him in the mainstream media, he's made some concessions to that. He blew up, back in early April, he attacked some Syrian base, and he's done some other things, a warlike nature. But now he's moved back to a more conciliatory approach with an agreement with Putin about a deconfliction zone. How do you read the contradictions within the Trump administration now, and what's your prognosis for how that's going to go?
I don't know. I don't really discern much of a difference between this administration and the previous one. The policy now seems to be that not very many people talk about is capturing territory that's currently held by ISIS and using the YPG, or we could call them the PKK because that's what it is. And of course, the United States has absolutely no intention of returning that territory to the Syrian government. They intend to hold that territory, and perhaps they promised the Kurds, the PKK, the Kurds, the nationalist movement, their own little state or autonomous area resembling the Kurdish autonomous area in Iraq.
The question I had for the speaker has to do with U.S. foreign policy and how it very much aligned in its approach with the Odette Yinon plan. Are you familiar with the Odette Yinon plan? Oh. Odette Yinon. Okay, I may have pronounced it. It's an Israeli plan that was formulated back in the 1980s when the Israelis invaded Lebanon. And basically, its plan was to balkanize the Middle East and to create separate cantons for the Sunnis and for the Kurds, and to weaken the whole area. That's exactly what's being played out. And I think it was the same forces that were involved in 9/11, the neocons, and those who planned the war on terror are executing this plan. And I think that was something that we should talk about, and as part of our movement to explain that this is the strategy that our government is being carried out. And a lot of people making these decisions obviously are the neocons, and many of them are Israelis, US citizens. So I want your perspective on that and what can be done.
After Brzezinski died, I reread his book, The Grand Chessboard. And this is a great book if you want to understand U.S. foreign policy. And one of the things he said was that one of the bases of U.S. foreign policy, he put it in these phrases. One of the bases is to prevent the barbarians from coming together. Well, it's the same idea. I mean, it's like divide the Arab world, well, those are the barbarians. Divide the Arab world, partition it, make sure that they don't come together, divide them, separate. Yeah, so, I mean, that Israeli plan is just consistent with divide et impera, divide and conquer.
You talked about the separation of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Ba'athist socialists. And I'm just curious, you say that it goes very far back. I'm just curious, the Islamists, was that an organic thing in Syria, or was there any Western involvement in boosting the Islamists, boosting the Islamic / Muslim Brotherhood revolution, for lack of a better word?
I think it was, yes, organic. The Muslim Brotherhood arose in the confrontation of the Arab world with European colonialism. It was a response to European colonialism. You can construe it as an anti-imperialist movement.
The Islamists?
Yeah, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood had a different idea than the secularists or the socialists or the Arab nationalists about how to deal with European colonialism. And their idea was, well, we need to re-Islamize the society because the Europeans have come along and they've imposed their ideologies on us. They've essentially made Islam disappear. We have to recover Islam. Islam is what defines the Arab world. And once we do that, we'll have overcome our domination by the outside world. So, yeah, they have been, or historically, were an anti-imperialist organization. There are other Islamists, though. The Wahhabi Islam, which comes from Saudi Arabia, is not anti-imperialist. That is kind of a desert ideology, which is related to legitimizing the rule of the Saud family over Arabia. But the Muslim Brotherhood, is an anti-colonialist organization. But because it's opposed to secular movements, to communist movements, to socialist movements, to nationalist movements, various Western governments have sought to exploit them, to enroll them as, tactical allies. And in their case, because, they're using Islam to organize their anti-colonialism. They look at the Ba'athists and they say, look at these guys. First, they're secularists. So we want to create a society that's based on the Quran. Once we create an Arab world that's based on the Quran, we'll have overcome our domination by the West. Because what did the West do? They came along, they eliminated Islam as the defining characteristic of the Arab world. So let's recover the greatness of the Arab world when it was an Islamic world. And but the Ba'ath Arab socialists, they're secularists. They don't want to base the state on the Quran. Plus, they're socialists and they're nationalists. And these are foreign ideologies that don't come from God, they come from Europe.
Thank you so much for everything that you said. I wish he was still here too, because I was in Syria recently about 7 months ago, and I met with opposition. And there is a moderate opposition. There were a coalition of about 10 different groups. And there's also someone that is given a position in the government now to be their opposition.
Right.
And what the opposition said was, this is no longer our fight. They brought in terrorists from, 80 different countries. This is a foreign invasion. And so they had pulled back, and they're still in opposition, and, but this is a foreign invasion like Iraq, under selling it with democracy. But what I wanted to ask was the thing that one of the guys asked me, he said, why in the West do you never mention the Arab Spring of 2005? Because that was when Israel and the CIA killed the Prime Minister of Lebanon to frame Syria for it, and that was their political way of trying to get rid of him. And when that didn't work, they moved to the military option, which we're seeing now. But it was called the Arab Spring. It was all over Newsweek. Does anybody remember this? The Arab Spring of 2005. It was on all the covers of the magazines, and in Lebanon, nobody remembers it? Okay, and that's what the opposition guy said. He said, this, and even Wesley Clark, He's on CNN, he's saying ISIS was formed by Saudi Arabia and Israel to take out Hezbollah. I mean, this is being driven by Israel, and nobody wants to touch it. I mean, that's the bottom line. Unless we do, we're never going to figure it out. We're going to be, I've gone to 100 different things like this, and it's always the same, and it's that gap is always left out. We never hear about the 2006 attack on Lebanon. It just jumps from like 2003 and then jumps ahead to 2011 Arab Spring 2. It's very odd, but I don't know if it's taboo, obviously, but this is AIPAC, JINSA, ADL. We're fighting Israel's war. I have family in the military, I know this.
I mean, my book is called Washington's Long War on Syria. So, you know, Washington has been trying to get rid of the Assads for a long time. Washington has been opposed to Arab nationalism for a long time, for all the reasons I laid out. Israel doesn't like Arab nationalism either. So, I mean, their views, their interests are congruent, that of Washington and Israel. But I mean, this is a long-term fight, or a long-term battle on the part of Washington. Washington Washington has been trying for decades to get rid of this government, this movement. Not only a movement in Syria, it was a movement in Libya, it was a movement in Iraq. There's also a similar movement in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Interestingly, if you look at the Islamic Republic of Iran, many of its values approximate those of the Arab nationalists. They do talk about unity, as the Arab nationalists do, but they talk about the unity of the Islamic nation. They talk about freedom from foreign domination, and while they would never call their economy socialist, it is still largely publicly owned and planned, and the Constitution also defines the private sector as subordinate to the public sector. So, I mean, this is a project, and that explains why it is that those countries are targets of Washington. Also targets of Israel, but they're targets of Israel because those countries are opposed to Israel being a foreign implantation in the middle of the Arab and Islamic worlds.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I was thinking about Britain, because if you look back at the history of imperialism and the form that it's taken and NATO's move after Yugoslavia east to encompass as many countries as it is, you have to also look at Britain with May holding on against, I don't know if this is going to happen, but a possible Corbyn win and maybe some pulling back from the wars that Britain, as part of NATO, is involved in. But, you know, the Zionists got their start in Britain, and, you know, the people like Jan Smuts and what's the other guy's name? Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, were there. They admired them, and they saw the people of the Middle East as inferiors and called them horrible names. And so the fact of the matter is that the United States has the same racist view. I mean, in United States imperialism always demonizes people as inferiors, and they're not ready for democracy and all this other stuff. But more and more lately, I guess I've been reading a lot of Irish history lately, I see that is true, is that the view of looking at a group of people, as the Europeans do, as inferiors, and therefore the people having the right, once they justify it this way, to destroy and murder. I mean, you saw the pictures of Mosul, and it is the most horrendous thing. And when they said it's been liberated, it's been obliterated. And the fact is that the numbers of people, I heard 450,000 people killed in Syria. You know, the numbers of people who are dying in Yemen because the United States and Britain are helping the Saudis to just, it's a genocide, and it's Malthusian, it's eugenics so that these bastards can take over the world. So it's just, okay, I will stop. But I just feel as if, let's not consider Britain part of the evil that we're discussing.
Mm-hmm. Britain, France, Canada, lots of countries. Okay.
The word socialism has been so abused, and many, the IRA and, a whole bunch of Israel used to be regarded, as social. And when you say, when you use the word socialism with that context, I've got a difficulty in understanding what it means. To me, it's like Marxian and with a historical perspective. But in the Middle East, it strikes me that they never went through a capitalist revolution. That they went from feudalism, with a religious thing, to what they are now. So I wonder what socialism even means to them, And as you say, when you say that, it's the public ownership rather than private and the public being dominant, yeah, but who is the top? Who is that governmental group? It's not like, like a group of capitalists. It's like feudalists, like, you know what I'm saying? People that believe in a sort of pyramid societal thing so what? What the hell?
No, I mean, you're right. There are various kinds of socialism. I mean, there's not just the Marxist socialism. There's Arab socialism. We have a utopian socialism. There are various socialisms. Obviously, the Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party isn't a Marxist socialist party. They had Marxist advisors, but they weren't Marxists. And, some people think because I described the Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party and I described their struggle against the despotism, or what Lusardo calls the international dictatorship of the United States, that I'm somehow a partisan of Ba'ath Arab socialism. I'm not, myself. My views are more similar to a guy who's pictured right over there, Ahmad Sadat, who is a Marxist socialist, and not an Arab socialist, and his party would call the Arab socialists kernel, what do they call it? The kernel socialism, because this is socialism that came to power through military dictatorships, as the Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party came to power as a result of a military dictatorship in which Hafez al-Assad was involved. But you're right, it's an Arab socialism. They don't pretend that it's Marxist socialism, and it's an Arab socialism that is not working class based. In fact, the Syrian constitution prohibits parties based on class. They also prohibit parties based on religion and all kinds of things. And the reason why is because their mission is to create unity within the Arab world. So they say if we have parties based on class, then we can't create unity, this national unity. Yes.
Hi, first off, in relation to the question about Baathism and socialism, I'd just like to read a very brief quote from Michel Aflaq, the main founder of the Ba'ath Party, in describing socialism. This is Michel Aflaq. "We are part of the working class. True socialists consider themselves part of the working class. The socialist rule is that which is led by the working class." So that gives you some idea about Baathism and view of the state and the working class. But going into this, the issue of the dispute between the Islamists and the Arab nationalists, wouldn't it be fair to say, being that the Ba'ath Party's socialism, nationalism is based in Islam, even though the founder is a Christian, Michel Aflaq, he stated that Ba'ath socialism is not based on some foreign concept from Europe or anywhere else. It's based in Islamic principles, but not in establishing a fundamentalist government. Nonetheless, it's based in the Arab traditions. Isn't it fair to say that, in fact, it's the Baathists and the Arab nationalists that are the truly indigenous movement there, because they're trying to build upon the Islamic traditions, while it's the Islamists who are basically trying to just go back in time and resurrect previous previous forms of government from the past, rather than building on the past traditions?
I'm not sure what your question was. I mean, the founders of the Ba'athist Party, and by the way, the Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party is a conjunction of two parties, the Ba'ath Party and the Arab Socialist Party. So there was a socialist party which joined with the Ba'ath Party. The Ba'ath Party was mainly concerned with Arab nationalism. and then there was a socialist party which joined. Their platforms were very similar. But, I mean, Aflek did recognize that Islam was an important part of the Arab world. And although he wanted to create a secular state, he did recognize that that Islam would have a place. And I believe I can't recall if this is still the case in the current constitution, but in the 1973 constitution, I believe it was the case that the president is required to be Islamic or a Muslim. But I wouldn't say that they're more indigenous than the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood is indigenous too. I mean, it originates organically out of the Arab world's encounter with European colonialism just as much as Baathism does.
In tandem, U.S. and Israel and Saudi Arabia have worked together against Arab nationalism. It's been a long war. 67, 50 years ago, Syria and Egypt were the targets, and that war, by blunting the Arab nationalist current, actually saved the thrones of the Saudis and the other Gulf kingdoms, which are such a gold mine for the United States. And of course, that was the year that the Ikhwan al-Muslimin declared their so-called holy war. In 1982, the Hama uprising came 6 months before Israel's invasion of Lebanon. And I was in Lebanon in 2006, right after Israel suffered its first major military defeat at the hands of the Lebanese resistance led by Hezbollah. And at that time, there was never such a mass spirit of secular unity, because here a Shia-led resistance aided by secular Syria and Islamic Iran had defeated Israel. And all of a sudden, suddenly you began hearing the Shia menace, when millions of people across Lebanon and across divided Lebanon and the Arab world were looking to this revolutionary Shia leadership and its allies. And that's when the Saudi flag began appearing on Sunni neighborhoods in Beirut, and the money began pouring in. And Abrams and other State Department people started talking about the Shia crescent and this menace that existed in nobody's minds. The full court press began for creating a sectarian war in the region.
Excellent points. No, those are excellent points. I have nothing to add to that.
You're calling the shots.
Right.
I'm still wondering about that earlier question about why the Muslim Brotherhood is necessarily opposed to socialism or to the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, because we'll look at Hamas. Hamas was cooperating as part of the Muslim Brotherhood and was cooperating with allied with the Ba'athist government in Syria for a long time, and has also acted in socialist ways in Palestine, won the elections in Palestine because they were providing social programs, not because of their religion. So I'm wondering if the Muslim Brotherhood could really be so at odds against the secular Syrian society if they were not influenced by Western imperialists, if this civil war, any kind of civil conflict could have happened without Western imperialists getting involved, pushing the Muslim Brotherhood into that.
But I mean, Hamas is supported by Syria. Syria supported the Palestinian Liberation Movement. Hamas had a falling out. It decided it was going to support the Islamists. Any others?
I would like for somebody, it doesn't have to be you, to address the context of this before 1989 and after 1989, because some of the analysis that I've heard is not just that imperialism came and tried to foment, the more fundamentalists and funded and whatever else and divide people, but also that there was a collapse in the socialist camp, so there was less of that pole to build, a more revolutionary driven type of movement, and so that's what happens when there's a vacuum. So thank you.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is that the that there was a crisis in the socialist and communist movement, even among the Arab nationalists, and this void was filled by Islamists. And Islam became a way of organizing people because the socialist movement, the communist movement, the nationalist movement had been largely destroyed. Not everywhere, obviously, but in many places it had been. Anyway, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all for being here and being patient with some of the disruptions we had.